you know, as I mentioned in the notice, we are recording these because people have been coming to us. We've had 700 people looking at one of the most recent ones. So if you mind, please let me know, and we'll stop. But for the most part, people find it very helpful to actually be able to refer back to these. And let me start my video so you can see who I am. So hello.
Hello.
Hi. So let's see. I'm gonna be multitasking a little bit because I'm having to have people register, as you know. And the reason for that, which I think is important to talk about a little bit, is a recent phenomena called Zoom bombing. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but Zoom bombing has begun to be a thing. And what it is when you post the meeting and the code to get in, and you don't have any safeguards in place, all sorts of people from all over the internet kind of come in and they start sharing screen pictures of things that are really inappropriate. And so I discovered this on my Thursday providers seminar, and since then have learned how to prevent that from happening. And so one of the things I might do today, if we have time after your questions, is actually kind of review how to set those settings so that people do not have to have that problem. But having said that, can you, both of you, introduce yourselves and tell me a little bit about your practice, where you're coming from, and what you're looking for in terms of tech tips?
I'm in St. Louis, Missouri, and I'm very new to the Zoom. In fact, one of the people that helped me with my computers let me into your thing.
Okay.
Into it.
Hi, Claire.
So I don't know anything except someone else just put Zoom on my. I usually use Skype or VSEE, so this is new for me to do Zoom.
Okay.
But I know, so anything you can teach me, but I only have 15 more. I'm going to have to leave here sooner than at 3. I thought.
Okay, so that's, and that happens for us. We have people coming in and out.
Yeah, that's
and
okay. I'll be on.
Are there particular questions or things that you want to kind of make sure you know about in terms of getting set up?
What do you suggest for beginners? For me, and that you other guys can answer now.
Sure. Okay. So that's so
I'm
Peggy. Okay. So Claire, let me unmute you, and then Glendon, can you tell us a little bit about what you might be looking for yourself in terms of tech tips?
Yes, I'm on from Palm Springs, California. I'm an end-of-life doula.
Wow.
An old Smith graduate from 1972. But because we're unable to visit clients at this point, I'd like to be able to communicate with them. I have myself set up on Zoom. I've never used it before. I have a number and a password. My two questions: how do I get that number and password to clients who may not have email? And how do I use chat?
Okay. So so the simplest one is how to use chat. So if you look at your screen and you take your cursor down to the bottom, you should see something that says chat, has a little. So if you hit that, you'll see on the right side a little group chat will show up. So that now that's if you wanted to talk to everyone, you would type this here. So now you all get a little note that says somebody chatted, and hopefully, so type this, okay, and then you see that. So now if I just wanted, if you look at the, it says to everyone. If you wanted to hit the cursor, hit the little caret there, I can just send something to you, Glendon. So type here, and that would be going just to you. Claire and Peggy did not see that, and you can do that as well. What's important, so that's the easiest question. The question you're asking, I think.
Excuse me, can I ask just a quick question about chat, because I'm on an iPad.
Yep.
I didn't see what you got sent. I know I've seen the chat before,
Yep.
but I'm not
Okay.
seeing it today.
So let me take a look at my Zoom on my, so if you should have a, tell me what you're seeing right now.
I see you speaking as the big background, and then I've got the 4 boxes with the like a little gallery set up here.
And if you press at the bottom of that, what does anything come up?
At the bottom of the whole picture?
Yeah.
Ah, yes, indeed. Let's
So,
see. Under more, and there's chat.
There you go. So
Got it,
iPads
okay.
and iPhones are the same. So that is what you can use for that. So that's chat. Now, the more important question, and I think, Glendon, I'm so glad first off, I'm so glad you kind of came in, because what a horrible thing to sort of be alone and not have somebody and not to be able to do any connection at the end of life. So I'm glad that you're trying to fix this, and let's see if we can help. Are you able to give a piece of paper to the are they in hospice or at home?
Yes, they're all in hospice.
Okay, so if they're in hospice, does the hospice have an email?
Yes.
Okay, so what you would want to do is you would want to give the hospice an email with your note, and what I would suggest is you probably want to set up a specific room at this point. The other thing is, what I guess the most important thing is, with the note, you want to put your phone number down, whatever your practice phone number down is, because the first time you set up this with a client or a patient, you're going to need to have them using their phone and perhaps speaking to you on the phone. That I think one of the things that really gets in people's way is they think it's sort of Zoom is an all or nothing. And that the transition is you go right to Zoom, and if there's a problem, you're stuck. But what you really need is you really want to have a phone that is available that's independent of Zoom. So if they're using an iPad or if they're using an iPhone, they need to be calling you on a second number if they get stuck. And then you need to walk them through it.
Okay.
You also want to reassure them that there are lots of problems the first time, but it gets better, and anticipate that you and they are going to feel frustrated. That psychologically we take connection for granted so much that in some ways this is where your old disability awareness training comes in, and you sort of have to unlearn some of the privilege that we have just talking. And then you need to really be patient and help remind them that no problem is too small. Basically, we did a little bit of talking about cutting and pasting and typing in chat here. And I don't know about you, but sometimes providers feel like, oh, I don't want to ask that, it's too basic.
I've never done it.
And if you're thinking that, your chances are your patients are thinking it even more. So really what you would stress on the phone is the most important thing is that we stay in contact and we get this started. Lastly, what I would say to answer your question is, remember that HIPAA has been suspended temporarily, and that although we're really kind of shooting for best practices in general, if some of these folks are only going to be alive for the next few days or weeks, I really think it's okay for you to be doing phone, and to be and that phone counts, and that if FaceTime works for them as opposed to Zoom or a new platform, that counts. You might also want to reach out to their family members to see if there is a tech-savvy family member that can be with them to get them set up. But so you're kind of bridging this, not just having them start with a list of instructions, but you want to have a number in there as well.
Okay, thank you. That's very good, Michael.
No problem. So Peggy, let's go back to you. Tell me a little bit about where where are you beaming from, and who's that was like just
My husband.
your husband?
It's an arm of my husband.
So
he happens to be a therapist also, but he's not a Smith person.
okay.
I graduated earlier than probably all of you, because I graduated in '68.
Oh wow. Well, I graduated in '94.
75.
And Claire, how are you a Smithy too?
Technology.
I am, yeah. 85 for me.
Okay, so I'm definitely the newbie. So So
I
Peggy,
don't know technology very well. I can do Skype and VSEE, but this is harder.
okay, so you know what's interesting is if you remember back and you think back to Skype when you first started, it probably didn't seem as easy as it is now.
Right. That's true.
And the analogy I like to have people think about in terms of technology is, remember graphite #2 pencils?
Yes.
Yeah, we all remember
still
those.
use-
Yeah, remember how in September when you came back to school after summer, it felt weird? Even though you knew how to use it, you hadn't done it for a while. So some of this, and what we know from the neurology of learning is that learning a new thing takes certain amount of mental processes and energy. So it's understandable that this is going to feel a little bit more awkward. I think that Skype in a pinch is good, and Skype might have changed in terms of maybe they're now HIPAA compliant. But my sense is that I tend to stick with Zoom just because Zoom, it seems to me to be the most robust platform and they're HIPAA compliant. And
They are. See, but VSEE is also HIPAA compliant.
Well,
And you guys are harder.
sure, and they're what?
You guys seem hard. They're HIPAA compliant.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
Well, again, I am not a poster. I'm not sort of a representative from Zoom. I don't have any stock in Zoom. I refused to get Zoom stock when, in fact, I probably could have made a killing on it because I don't have a vested interest in it. But what I do,
Zoom is good because you can do conference calls and stuff.
Zoom is really
why I
also
want
very
it.
good for group therapy.
Yes.
And I think the other thing I want to make sure you all know is the difference between gallery view. So right now you may be in gallery view, and what that means is this sort of may look like the Brady Bunch, and you see my picture has a light around it. If you go to the upper right-hand corner and you tap on speaker view.
I don't have. I have a that. Let's see. That's gallery.
And that's
I see
different
gallery
on
view.
Yep. So
And-
now if you're on speaker view, everyone try saying a little something.
Oh, well, I'm on.
Okay, okay.
I must be already on it.
Yep. So what you should be seeing if you're on speaker view now is whenever somebody speaks, that person is the person that occupies the most of the screen. And what's good about that for some of us who don't want to look at ourselves as clinicians very much is you can really minimize yourself to a very small person. And what's good about this is it helps you stay focused on the patient when the patient's talking. Where it doesn't work as well is if you want to be tracking groups, if you want to be tracking everyone in your group. So do any of you do groups right now?
Not on there.
No.
Not at the moment.
Not at the moment. If you were to do groups and you switch to gallery view, you could see how this would be useful in that now I can track all members of the group to sort of see if somebody is getting distracted or somebody is having a significant
see.
emotional
There's
response to
gallery
what's being said. And that is really useful, especially because it allows you to track the group as a whole at the same time.
Mhm, I see.
All right. So with me, it also is a good reminder to be sure that everybody gets some airtime or attention if there's a larger group. Where this is really important is if you're using Zoom on an iPad or an iPhone, and you've got a group of more than like 3 or 4 people, they're not all going to show up. So you're going to have like a little arrow that shows you, that indicates there are more members, but that may not be enough for you to remember to kind of keep everybody kind of in your mind and in your thinking as you're working with a group. Claire, what are
Michael, excuse me,
Yep.
Michael, can I give Peggy one quick Zoom
Yep.
pitch since I'm a total technophobe, Peggy?
Oh, yes.
And I couldn't believe.
Claire.
Right. So
Yes,
I
thank
had
you.
never used Zoom, and Zoom, besides being a great way to see your clients, turns out is an unbelievable tool for your own social well-being. Because the first week I was on Zoom, we did a cocktail party one night and a dinner party the next night with friends, 4 or 5 people.
Yeah.
And you can literally hang out with your friends, and like we all had our plates of food and played a game, and it
I don't think my
literally
friends
felt
have
like
Zoom.
we had.
Your friends have Zoom. Oops, what happened? Whoops, it stopped.
What's that?
Claire, you froze up a little bit. Can you
I don't
repeat
know what
yourself?
happened.
Well,
Hello?
So Claire may be freezing up because she's using wireless, which brings me to another
Wow.
point that's really
Michael, before you go on, can I ask
My-
a question?
sure. And Claire, apologies if you can hear us, you're lagging a little bit, so we can't quite respond to you yet. But when you kind of catch up, we will go back to you. Go ahead, Glendon.
You said about
okay,
the
I'm
gallery
going
view.
into
If
the room with the router.
can you hear me?
I can hear you now, Glendon. Go ahead.
Over here, I can talk together. Okay,
If
I'll come.
if I click on gallery view, what's going to happen?
If you click on gallery view, then it's gonna go back to the Brady Bunch. If you click on speaker view, then it's going to be whoever is talking shows up big on the screen.
I don't have speaker view showing up. I didn't see that.
Well, that's probably because you're already in it.
It's in it, that's why.
Ah.
You have gallery view. or-
Yeah, it's a toggle.
I got
Okay.
that one.
Okay,
Thank you.
you're very welcome.
One
And
thing I really
so
learned.
let me throw something else in here. And Claire, you gave us a good opportunity for this. One of the biggest things that you can do to ensure good connectivity with your patients
Yeah.
and good and low lag time is always be plugged into a wire. That if you're using your computer, you need to be using an Ethernet cable or an adapter that plugs into your MacBook that will then also adapt to an Ethernet cable. And you need to plug it right into your router. That when you use wireless, you are taking the power of your broadband and you're basically chopping it into like a quarter of that. And so a lot of what will happen when you notice lag or freeze up is because people are using their phones and not connected to the router. If you don't have a computer and you have to use your phone, that's fine. But
So in my case, I'm using an iPad.
Yep. And so in your case, if it was possible for you to have an adapter, and I don't know if the hot flash or whatever they call the outlet can do an Ethernet cable, but in your case, you need to really be basically right on the router. So here's a good point. This highlights a really important point, which is, 3 weeks ago when we were just seeing the beginning of a pandemic and we were thinking, okay, I have to do this for a week or two because I want my patients to have continuity of care. I want myself to have continuity of business. I want to make sure that I'm around for the next 2 weeks. You didn't necessarily think about this in the same way, but now I hope that you're beginning to see this is going to be more than just 2 weeks. And you need to start making more systemic adaptations to your practice. So you may need to say, you know what, the router needs to go in
I
another
gotta get
room.
the phone, I'm sorry. But keep on there, stay on.
The router needs to go to another room, or the computer needs to be plugged in. So that the things that you were doing in a pinch, you now have to, I think, to sort of take a step back and go, you know what? This isn't going to work for 2 months. I can't have this sort of lag for 2 months. I need to make sure that my computer is plugged in. I need to make sure I get an adapter from Amazon, all that stuff.
So that's exactly where I am now. And I discovered that the router, so I moved from when I froze up, when I was in my another room, to right next to the router. But I didn't understand the part that you had said about what to get. I'd never heard of those adapters or what you were talking about. So it sounded like you weren't positive in terms of the iPad.
Right. So let me see very quickly. Let me consult the Oracle at Google to see if they have those.
Okay. I set up this nice little home office only to discover that the Wi-Fi to out there was not so good, or it turns out it was using Zoom.
Okay, so in fact, I'm going to give you a link in chat, and this link will tell you how to connect an iPad to a wired Ethernet port. Okay, and if you click on that, it will tell you what you need to buy. Okay, And I'm not a big fan. I'll tell you something. I have iPads and I have iPhones, and I've done therapy on all, and I've had PCs. I've done therapy on all of those. I think iPads are okay in a pinch, but the thing I don't like about iPads is it's a lot harder for you to sort of have some control over your office environment, so that if the patient's having a hard time figuring something out, you can't help them quite the same way. So that it's a lot easier for me right now as the host to be able to, for example, send to send a Glendon an invitation to open his camera if his camera is shut down. I don't find the iPad works as well for that. Also, the processing speed of an iPad, maybe the new ones are different, doesn't have to me the same quality, the same amount of quality.
Well, the newer one, I just bought this brand new iPad based on, not planning for a pandemic.
Yep.
So I feel like I kind of, even if it's 2 months, even if I have to sit on top of the router, I will.
Well, I mean, I don't think you will have to sit on top of the router. I'm honest. I know it seems like you're going back a few steps, but if you get an Ethernet adapter, what you're going to need to do is two things. You're probably going to need to get an Ethernet adapter, but you're also going to need to get a split, which is what plugs into the, what do they call that thing? The lightning port. So what you can do is what you'll probably order two things. One is the lightning port that splits into two lightning port plugs, and then
lightning port.
Yep, it's in the article. So basically, the little hole at the bottom of your iPad, that is where that is the port for the lightning cable, and that's where you plug in to your electricity. Now, if you've already got a split, meaning you've got something you can plug in there that takes that hole and gives you two holes, then you only are going to need to get the Ethernet adapter. But if you don't have that, you're going to need to get one, because what's going to happen is your battery is going to be wearing down while you're plugged in to the Ethernet cable. And if you don't have another port to charge it, you're going to run out of battery at some point. So if you're like me and you see 4 patients back to back, there's no way that you would be able to do that on the battery. You're going to need to have
I've been using it plugged in while I do my meetings.
Right. So can you see the problem there if you need to have that plug used for an Ethernet cable?
But the Ethernet cable, that's what you're also calling the Ethernet adapter. Yeah. That is what's going to help me with my sorry, this was the part I didn't get right from the beginning.
Okay. So if you look at the back of your router, you should see several plugs that look like kind of phone outlets, but a little bigger.
Yep.
That is what an Ethernet port is. That's where your Ethernet cable goes.
Right. One says internet and one says, to Ethernet, right. There's.
So you basically, what you will do is you'll buy those adapters, but you're also going to buy an Ethernet cable. And I would suggest that you get a long Ethernet cable so that you can run it back to your office if you want to. So it may not be as aesthetically pleasing to have a 100-foot Ethernet cable running through your house, but I can tell you that I find it really useful. That if I have to
So I'm sorry. So the Ethernet cable is one thing, and then the adapter. What is the adapter called? I thought it was an Ethernet adapter.
So let's talk about let's talk about three things. Let's talk about ports, plugs, and adapters.
Okay, great. Yep.
Ethernet cables have at each end a plug that you plug in. Okay.
Right.
The hole in, whether it's the router or your computer or anything, is the port. Okay, you need to make sure a plug can go in a port. Now, if you look at the bottom of your iPad, right now you don't have an Ethernet-shaped port. And so you need to adapt it. And that brings us to adapters. Adapters help us adapt our ports to different plugs.
Got it.
Got it?
So the Ethernet cable must go into an Ethernet adapter which fits into the port on the bottom of my iPad.
Exactly. You're
really good. You're a really good teacher, Michael.
Oh, well, no, you know, honestly, the secret here is not feeling ashamed to not know things. And I think that's really where we need to, and what you're doing now, you need to model this for your patients, because a lot of our patients are feeling really kind of narcissistically vulnerable right now as it is. I mean, think about, let's just get a little socio-political here for a minute, because that's one of the things we do on Tech Tips is we talk about tech tips, but we also talk about the clinical application. Think about all of the messages that senior citizens and older Americans have been getting in the past couple weeks about how relatively worthless they are, that we're even considering a certain number of acceptable losses of theirs if it means the economy is going to stay the same. I find that sort of language is everywhere, and it's really pernicious. And if you're an older adult, you'll often see some of the older adults sort of rallying in sort of a way of saying that they don't need people to worry about them. They don't want to be a burden. And part of why they don't want to be a burden is because they've internalized this sense of that they're worthless, and that the best thing they should do is just to not be a problem. And we've kind of created a really problematic thing in society where the one thing a lot of older folks think they have to offer is not being around or not being a burden. And so if that's already in the psyche of some of your patients, they are going to be less likely to say, well, what's an Ethernet cable? What's a plug? I don't want to feel irrelevant. I don't want to feel like I'm more difficult for you. I don't want to be a problem. And so what you need to be able to do is really model, hey, it is okay to not know certain things. You do not have to prove yourself here. It's my job to help you get connected so that we can continue our work. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense. So just to finish, since I'm asking these questions, so I need my 100-foot Ethernet cable, an Ethernet adapter, and then which enables the cable to go into the iPad, which is going to be connected to the router by plugging it into one of the ports here on the back of the router. One question is, how do I know which one? Because there are, in the little Ethernet area, there's room for 4 different
Doesn't matter.
things and doesn't matter. So if they're already,
so as long as there's nothing in there that you're pulling out, it doesn't matter. You just put it
great.
in there.
And then the split thing that I didn't understand what that was.
Sure. So if you just had an adapter that only had one port, which was an Ethernet port, you would plug that in, but you wouldn't have any way of keeping the iPad charging. And
I see.
Wear out the battery. So what you do is you have an adapter that splits, meaning it plugs into one hole and creates 2 ports.
I see.
Okay. So, and then those 2 ports will probably look like 2 lightning ports, the 2 little holes that you see now on your iPad. And then in one of them, you'll plug the other adapter that has the Ethernet, and in the other one, you'll plug your electric cord.
Got it. So I need to buy 2 things, an Ethernet cable and an Ethernet adapter that splits.
Gotcha. And in fact, all you need to do is click on the link that I sent you that's in chat, and you'll actually be taken to an article that will tell you what you need to get and how to do it.
Great. And then how do I access that link once this chat once this Zoom session is over?
I can actually email that to you. I believe I have chat recorded so that I can do that. But just in case I don't, I will send it to you right now.
Oh, that's fantastic. Thank you so much, Michael.
You're very welcome. Glendon, let's go back to you now. What else is, you've got a pretty Herculean task there, kind of trying to bring care into an environment where I'm imagining COVID-19, you're not allowed to be anywhere near these folks.
That's correct. Can't go.
Right. So tell me a little about your practice before COVID-19 in terms of specifically physical contact that you had with patients.
Basically, I was visiting homes and sometimes assisted living, depends on where the person was, and making contact with them and working with them around end-of-life issues.
Yep.
Uh, some are more capable than others. I know there's one person that I have contact with who's 96, can barely handle the telephone.
Yep.
When I call him. So that we would not be able to do anything unless I had somebody there to do it for him.
Yeah.
And he's in a boarding situation, so that's not likely to happen.
Right.
Uh,
So what
Otherwise,
go ahead.
go ahead.
What percentage of your current folks are you doing home visits versus hospice visits?
They're all home visits.
Okay. And are you working by yourself, or are you working in connection with the visiting nurses? Or
I do both. I work with a hospice as a volunteer and independently myself.
okay.
Right now, all the people I'm working with are hospice patients.
Okay. And is there anybody that is in a shelter that does not have access to their own phone, or is home and impoverished and doesn't have their access to their own phone?
The elderly gentleman does not have access to it. I have to call the boarding home and they carry the phone to him.
Right. And how are they handling COVID-19 now in terms of sanitation and disinfection and all that?
Well, I don't know since I can't go in to see.
Right. Okay.
I know there's a lady I see at a large assisted living facility. She's now confined to her room at the facility. All meals are served
Right.
in their rooms. They just can't even see their friends at the facility.
I mean, I think part of what you want to do when you can is, without creating an extra bit of work for them, team with visiting nurses as much as possible, because they're probably going in and they probably are capable. So, and welcome whoever just joined you.
Oh, that's my wife.
Hi.
Right up there.
No, you can come back. You don't have to hide away. So really, part of what you need to be doing is teaming with them a little bit. And the other piece is you might want to be considering using other kinds of technology besides Zoom to do things like recording mindfulness meditations. I don't know if you're already doing some of this.
Yes.
Okay.
I'm not recording any, because this was quite sudden that we got shut off.
Right.
But I do some meditation stuff with some of my patients.
So what you want to consider is signing up for something like Insight Timer. I don't know if you're familiar with that.
No.
Insight Timer is a great service. It has meditations, thousands and thousands of meditations. But you can also register yourself as a teacher, and you can also record some of your meditations and actually have them available. And that, I think, can be really useful because it gives you another way of connecting with your patients. And it also, just to kind of go psychodynamic for a minute, it provides patients with a transitional object, right? They get to be able to connect with you even in your absence. And I think there are some really good ones, and I think you could probably make a really good one with a very minimal use of technology. You could do it on your iPad if it has a built-in camera or a built-in microphone. But that's another thing you might want to consider leveraging with patients, especially if they're shut in.
All right, that's a nice idea. Thank you.
You're welcome. And it might not make sense for everyone. It might not make sense for folks, for example, if they're visually impaired, it might be hard for them to enable the app if they just have a smartphone. And some of our patients don't have smartphones yet. I think one of the things this pandemic is really highlighting is that social inequity is really still alive and well, especially in the groups that social workers treat. Are there things that you've noticed that have been real sticking points, Glendon, as you've tried to connect with people this past week?
No, it goes relatively well on the phone, except for the elderly gentleman who I'm sure the staff would not stay there with him and hold the phone right to his ear.
Right.
And so I spend my time usually just yelling on the phone. Hopefully
Mhm.
he will hear me.
Okay, so now this is an interesting adaptation. So because HIPAA has been suspended and because we're kind of flying by the seat of our pants here, what about the idea of having staff bring in the phone, and assuming it's a smartphone or a phone that has speakerphone capabilities, putting it
Yeah.
on speakerphone so that he doesn't need to hold it. They can just leave it in the room for 30 minutes or 45 minutes and then come back.
I can check with him. My sense is it's a landline, but I can check with them and see that. I'll check it out. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. And honestly, this is one of those times where systematic case management interventions are really important, which is we are living in a time where no one should have only a landline. I think that we can't possibly connect with people in the ways we need to connect with them with just a landline. And so to whatever extent you can advocate for the boarding house to get resources so that they can actually get access to a house smartphone. I suspect there is funding for these sorts of things if you find the right place, and I don't know who that would be in the state of California. But I think it's one of those places where part of what we're highlighting today is the extra bit of work we need to do. And if you've been doing home visits, you've already been meeting people where they're at, which puts you ahead of some of us that had an office, and people showed up at our office, and that was the expectation. We weren't ever expected to go to the patient's house and drive them to the office and then have them come in. But in terms of getting them ramped up with technology, we do need to take more of an active role. And that can feel really uncomfortable for clinicians because we're kind of creatures of habit and used to things being a certain way. And so the idea of advocating for a house to get a smartphone might seem a little unusual from what your common work is. But I can tell you from experience, one of the biggest interventions I've done with patients has been to either advocate for people to get smartphones or to advocate for the highest amount of bandwidth for cable. That in the old days, you'd see a family where they were fighting and arguing, and there was all this confrontation, and the confrontation could be around anything. But in this case, it was around parents were trying to do work, kids were streaming videos, another kid was playing video games, and they were all fighting because everything was lagging. The intervention in that case, rather than just exploring family conflict and how do you cope with negotiating resources, which is really useful in grist for our mill. The first thing is to do a case intervention, which is to say, get more expensive bandwidth if you can.
Yeah.
And so in some ways, throwing money at a problem is never our first hunch as a clinician. But I think in cases where it's preventing access, if all this man needs is access to a smartphone so that someone can bring it in and put it by his bedside so that he can hear meditations of you, he can hear you on speakerphone and stay connected, then there needs to be some mechanism. And I think we need to take an active role in triggering that mechanism to make sure that he has access to a smartphone.
That's great. That was great for you to say all that. I appreciate that very much.
Oh, not a problem.
Michael,
go ahead, Claire.
Do we have time for a quick, pure technical question?
Of course we do.
So I managed to get onto Zoom, and I'm able to start my Zoom meetings and pull people in. I kind of, but sometimes people have said, okay, I'm going to sign up for Zoom now. Which version do I sign up for? And I'm like, I don't even know how I got into it. I'm just in it, and now I know how to start a meeting and respond. But and I'm also in the non-paid 40-minute cutoff if you're in a group. And so I don't know if I need to, make an adjustment. I'm mostly seeing individuals, and I mostly have not gotten cut off. But this is sort of back to that wanting to move beyond flying by the seat of my pants to some systemic solidity.
Yes, so that's a really good point. And let me just suggest to you that this is exactly where you should be in this process, right? Because you know, as social workers, we're trained to utilize all available resources whenever possible. And this is an example where Zoom's offering that sort of free program. I have to tell you, I think that Zoom is not doing the best job they could of marketing themselves, in that the only product that they seem to be showing when people want HIPAA compliant is $200 a month. And I have to tell you, I am not paying $200 a month, and my product is HIPAA compliant. So first thing I would do is I would actually go to the Zoom sales page and actually try to set up an appointment with a salesperson. I know that sounds horrible, but basically then say, I'm a solo practitioner and I want to use your product. I really like it. And I'm looking for the Zoom Pro with HIPAA compliance, but I'm only one person. And what I suspect is that there is a different product for small solo practitioners, and it's just not being advertised in quite the same way that Doxy and some other ones are. So, and the first thing I would do is do that and get on board with the Zoom Professional. It allows you to do things with no time limits. It allows you to do things without, and it's HIPAA compliant. What was the other part of your question? Can you remind me?
No, that was really it about, the other part was, so people this is sort of more on the social side, which is self-care for us as clinicians, which is people who have not yet gotten on have said, okay, I know I'm supposed to get on Zoom, but which one? And I guess there's these different choices and I remember when I first got on, I was confused. Somehow, as I tend to do with tech things, I muddle my way through until I land somewhere without really understanding it. So,
so let's talk for a second about platforms. Now, when we say platform, basically it means which way of accessing Zoom are you standing on? Are you using an iPad, iOS, iPhone platform? Are you using a personal computer that's sort of, Microsoft? Is it a MacBook Pro? And if that's what they mean, if they're saying which Zoom platform do I use, then when you go to the actual download page, it will show you what your options are, whether it's Windows or something else. So when people ask you which Zoom, I would kind of ask them what they mean by that. When you say, what do you, and what I find helpful when working with people around the technology stuff is I try to get really basic and say, what's the thing you want it to do? So tell me what the thing is you want to happen. And they might say, well, I want to put Zoom on my iPhone. Okay, well, now I know what you mean about, which Zoom. So you want to go to the same Zoom page and download the iOS. Or they'll say, well, I've got Zoom on
remind me what iOS means?
Internet operating system. You don't need to know that.
Okay. Okay.
iOS is usually is the internet operating system that's usually associated most with iPhones and iPads, Mac and Apple things. But what you probably need to do is you probably need to be asking them, okay, what are you trying to ask me here when you say which type of Zoom? What do you mean?
But that would imply that I would have the answer, Michael.
Well, no. Use your good social work skills. We always can ask questions, and even if we're not the expert, even if we don't know, we can always ask more questions. And I am pretty willing to bet that if they kind of talked a little bit more about it, like you could ask questions like, well, what kind of computer do you have? Well, I've got a Mac. Okay, so are you asking me which Zoom do you use on a Mac? Yeah, that's what I want. Okay, well, go to the Zoom download page and look for the Zoom client for Macs. Okay, because a lot of times people just want to kind of need to figure out which category they're putting their apples in.
And FaceTime, I've actually been using FaceTime with a lot of people who have Apple products, and
I'm almost
that I guess is okay at the moment because it's HIPAA, because we're not worrying about HIPAA at the moment, but that will stop being okay.
Yeah, so there's a good clinical reason to move people off FaceTime as soon as possible. There's several good reasons. One is anytime we start planning for longer term interventions, it's an expression of hope on the part of the therapist to the patient, which is, I believe that you and I are going to be working together and surviving this thing for several months. And because of that, we want to be able to build something consistent. So I think that although, yes, FaceTime is fine now, and I'm not hating on FaceTime, I think as soon as you possibly can, you want to start going towards best practices for when things return to kind of normal, both
Right.
for patients, but also for you.
Although you don't hang out with the older 60 crowd, where we believe best practice is having a device that we actually can make work and do the thing we want for it to do. And therefore, for people who are good with FaceTime, they're like so thrilled that it's easy and it works. But I hear what you're saying.
Yes,
Totally.
but you also, I agree. But part of what you're doing, if you think about this from an oppression systems point of view, is you're using systems beating. You're basically using ageism to justify not learning a new thing. You're basically, right? You've internalized the sense that you can't learn new things. And to you and your other 60-year-old cohort, I would say you are perfectly capable of learning a new technology platform. You don't want to, it's not comfortable, but you're perfectly capable of doing it. And that's my ego psychologist coming out, which is always pitching at the highest level of your capability. You did not come into this workshop on FaceTime. You've already showed me that you're capable of using Zoom. You've been able to ask really important questions and assimilate this information. And I have to believe that your patients are just as capable of learning as elders as you are. So I really do
because we have wisdom, Michael.
Yes.
It's right. It's a miracle. I've actually taught some people how to do things. To me, it's an astonishment. So now you've empowered me, Michael.
Well, and you want to think about that. Go, wow, where did I get this message that it's astonishing that I, as someone in my 60s, 70s, and 80s, can teach people things that are new?
Well, I can teach them a lot of other things. It's just this one's a little long.
Right, but
listen, I'm sorry. I have to run. I actually
okay, bye, Claire.
Thank
Michael.
you. So you're going to continue doing more of these, is that right?
Yep, every Monday we're doing this.
Bless your heart. Thank you so much.
Oh, you're very welcome.
Such a great service that you're doing. Go to sleep tonight knowing you've done really, really good will.
Oh, thank you, Claire. I appreciate it.
You're very welcome. Bye, Glendon.
Bye, Claire. Michael?
Right. Yes, go ahead, Glendon.
Just as we close out, I typed the meeting down, or typed the message in chat.
Yep.
Now, how do I make it go somewhere?
Hit return.
Return.
Or enter, whatever you
Enter.
have on your.
Okay. Now I got those Dropbox, Microsoft OneDrive, Google Drive box.
Oh, no. Go back. So are you in the chat window in Zoom where it says type message here?
Yes.
And you typed the message.
I said to everyone, and I typed in the message.
And then what happens if you hit enter?
Nothing.
Make sure can you see your cursor hovered over the typed message here?
Yes.
Click on it to make sure that you're actually clicked in that window.
Okay.
And now try again.
There we go.
There you go.
Thank you.
You're very welcome. When in doubt, assume that part of that's because you are not really in Zoom, even though you think you are.
Okay.
Okay.
Right. And I have to sign out too.
Okay. Well, feel free to come back next week.
I hope I can. I hope I have questions. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome, Glendon. Hang in there.
You too.
All right. Okay, well, I think I'm going to sign off for now. And if you are listening after we've done this, please feel free to subscribe. And we do this every Monday. You're very welcome to come. And hopefully you've gotten a sense of the balance here, which is that we balance tech tips with also seeing how technology really does amplify some of the psychological conflicts, problems, and solutions. I think we talked a lot about ageism today, and I think that is a huge issue that has been around a long time, but that this pandemic is actually showing us how folks that are older than a certain age tend to be devalued and have internalized that devaluation. So if that's one of you, please know that you are worth it, you do matter, and you are perfectly capable of learning how to use Zoom and how to use technology as we get into the next stage of our professional practice. It's going to be a bumpy ride, but you can do it. Anyway, that's it for me, and we'll see you all next week. Bye.